Glendale, Arizona, 2001. The stadium lights blazed intensely over the green field. The roar of the crowd echoed as the Arizona Cardinals players prepared for another game. Among them, a safety wearing number 40 stood out not just for his intensity on the field, but for something few could define. A depth in his gaze, as if he were always questioning the meaning of each play, each victory, each moment. His name was Pat Tillman. That year, Pat was at the peak of his career. He had just turned down a multi-million-dollar offer of $9 million for 3 years from the St. Louis Rams to remain loyal to the Cardinals. He drove his old college pickup truck, didn't own a cell phone, and spent his nights reading philosophy instead of attending celebrity parties. To the world, he was just another talented player. But to those who truly knew him, Pat Tillman was something different. He was a man in search of purpose. And then, on September 11, 2001, the world changed. On that fateful day, as the Twin Towers collapsed in New York, Pat sat in the Cardinals' press room, eyes fixed on the television screen. Something inside him broke. Or rather, something ignited. From that moment on, football would never have the same meaning. Pat Tillman was about to make the most extraordinary decision of his life, a decision that would transform him from sports star into American legend. Before becoming a legend, Pat Tillman was just a kid from California with an enormous heart and even greater determination. Born on November 6, 1976, in San Jose, Pat was the oldest of 3 brothers. From an early age, he had something special. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but he possessed an intensity that was contagious to everyone around him. At Leland High School, Pat excelled as a linebacker, leading his team to the Central Coast Division I championship. But it wasn't just on the football fields that he shone. Pat was a dedicated student, a voracious reader, and someone who questioned everything. He didn't accept ready-made answers. He wanted to understand the why behind things, the purpose behind actions. His passion and talent earned him a scholarship to Arizona State University. There, Pat not only became one of the best players on the team, but also excelled academically. In 1997, he led the Sun Devils to an undefeated season and a spot in the Rose Bowl. He was named Pac-10 Defensive Player of the Year and won multiple academic awards. Pat graduated in just 3.5 years, something rare for a high-level athlete. But perhaps the most important thing happened on that campus. It was there that Pat met Marie, his high school sweetheart, the girl with the most beautiful smile from the class of 1994. They were inseparable. Marie was his life partner, the person who understood his existential doubts and his constant desire to do something greater. In 1998, the Arizona Cardinals selected Pat in the 7th round of the NFL draft. Many doubted him. They said he was too small, too slow. But Pat, as always, responded with action. He became a starter in his first season, helping the Cardinals reach the playoffs for the first time in 51 years. In 2000, he broke the franchise record with 224 tackles. And then came the Rams' offer, $9 million, a fortune, a chance to play for a championship team. But Pat refused. He was loyal to the Cardinals, loyal to his teammates. "They believed in me when no one else did," he said. "I'm not going to abandon them for money." It was this loyalty, this unwavering integrity, that defined Pat Tillman. And it was this same strength of character that would lead him to make the most difficult decision of his life, just a few months later, September 11, 2001. Pat watched in horror as planes struck the Twin Towers. In that moment, something changed inside him. He finished the 2001 season playing each game with his mind elsewhere. Football, which had been his life, suddenly seemed insignificant. In the last few years, especially after recent events, Pat said later, I've come to appreciate how shallow and insignificant my role is. It's not important anymore. In the spring of 2002, during his honeymoon with Marie, Pat made a decision. He would enlist in the United States Army. Marie was shocked, but she knew her husband. When Pat believed in something, nothing would stop him. In May 2002, Pat called Cardinals coach Dave McGinnis and informed him of his decision. McGinnis tried to convince him to reconsider. Pat was at the peak of his career. He had a $3.6 million 3-year contract waiting for him. But Pat was firm. My great-grandfather was at Pearl Harbor. Many in my family have gone and fought in wars. I haven't really done anything significant in terms of putting my life at risk in that way. On May 31, 2002, Pat and his younger brother Kevin enlisted together in the Army. The news shocked the nation. An NFL player at the height of his career, leaving millions of dollars to earn $18,000 a year as a soldier? It was unimaginable. The media surrounded Pat, wanting interviews, wanting to understand. But Pat refused all offers. He didn't want attention. He wasn't doing this to be a hero. He was doing it because he believed it was right. Pat and Kevin completed basic training in September 2002. Then they entered the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. The training was brutal, designed to break men. But Pat, as always, refused to give up. By the end of 2002, the Tillman brothers were assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment at Fort Lewis, Washington. Pat Tillman was no longer a football player. He was an Army Ranger, and his true mission was just beginning. In 2003, Pat deployed to Iraq as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He participated in the initial invasion, serving in combat with his unit. Pat saw war up close, saw death, saw the real cost of conflict. And he began to question. He started reading voraciously about foreign policy, about the reasons behind the war. In his rare free moments, he wrote in his journal, processing what he was seeing and living. After returning from Iraq in September 2003, Pat entered Ranger School at Fort Benning, Georgia. It was one of the Army's most challenging training programs, but on November 28, 2003, Pat graduated. He was ready for his next mission. In 2004, Pat was deployed to Afghanistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. He was stationed at Phobe Salerno in the eastern region of the country, near the border with Pakistan. It was Taliban territory, treacherous mountains, narrow valleys, and an enemy that knew every inch of that terrain. Pat was exactly where he wanted to be. He had enlisted to fight those who attacked his country on September 11th. He wanted to hunt Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And now, finally, he was in enemy territory, making a difference. But in the mountains of Afghanistan, fate awaited Pat Tillman. And what would happen next would forever change how America would remember him. April 22, 2004. The mountains of eastern Afghanistan were bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Pat's Ranger platoon was on patrol near Spara, a mountainous and dangerous region, Taliban territory. The mission was clear the area of enemy combatants. But something went wrong. The platoon was divided into 2 convoys due to a mechanical problem with one of the vehicles. The first group, including Pat, took an alternate route through a narrow canyon. It was perfect territory for an ambush. And that's exactly what happened. Suddenly, gunfire echoed through the valley. The enemy was in elevated positions, firing from high in the mountains. Pat and his team were trapped in a kill zone. But Pat didn't hesitate. He grabbed his M249 squad automatic weapon and began providing suppressive fire, covering his companions as they moved to a safer position. With the sun setting, the second convoy emerged from the canyon, coming out of a firefight. They were nervous, adrenaline pumping. And then they saw a figure on the ridge firing an AK-47 in their direction. It was Farhad, an allied Afghan soldier, fighting alongside Pat. What happened next was a tragedy of devastating proportions. The soldiers in the second convoy, unable to clearly identify who was on the ridge, began firing. Pat immediately realized the mistake. He shouted for his companions to stop. He threw a smoke grenade to signal his position. He waved his arms, but it was too late. In the confusion of combat, with the sun on the horizon blinding the shooters, bullets continued flying. Pat Tillman and Farhad were hit by fire from their own companions. Friendly fire. Pat was hit 3 times in the head. He died instantly. Corporal Pat Tillman, NFL star, Army Ranger, was only 27 years old. He had left millions of dollars and fame to serve his country. And now he was dead, not at the hands of the enemy he swore to fight, but by a tragic mistake of his own brothers in arms. The tragedy of Pat Tillman's death was only the beginning of an even darker story. The Army knew almost immediately that Pat had been killed by friendly fire. His platoon mates knew. The commanders knew. But America couldn't know. Not yet. Pat Tillman had become a symbol. The football player who left fame and fortune to fight for his country. The perfect story of American heroism, and the Army desperately needed stories of heroes amid increasingly unpopular wars. So, the lie began. On April 28, 2004, just 6 days after Pat's death, General Stanley McChrystal approved the posthumous award of the Silver Star. The citation said Pat had been killed under devastating enemy fire, while heroically leading his platoon. It was an emotional story. It was an inspiring story. It was a lie. The Tillman family was informed that Pat had died as a hero in combat against the enemy. They held a televised funeral on May 3rd, 2004. Thousands attended. Celebrities, politicians. Senator John McCain gave the eulogy. America mourned for its fallen hero. But on May 28, 2004, 5 weeks after Pat's death, the Pentagon finally contacted the Tillman family. The truth had leaked. Pat wasn't killed by enemy fire. He was killed by his own companions. Friendly fire. The family was devastated, not just by Pat's death, but by the lie, by the manipulation, by the use of Pat's name for war propaganda. Pat's mother, Mary Danny Tillman, spent the next 12 years obsessively investigating her son's death. She collected thousands of documents. She interviewed soldiers. She pressed Congress. She wrote a book. And what she discovered was even more disturbing. Military commanders had ordered soldiers in Pat's platoon not to discuss the circumstances of his death. Documents were destroyed. Testimonies were manipulated, all to protect the narrative of heroism that the Army had constructed. Investigations revealed that terrible command decisions had contributed to Pat's death. The platoon should never have been divided. Orders were confused. Communication was faulty. And when the mistake happened, instead of taking responsibility, the Army chose to lie Pat Tillman had left football to serve with honor. And in return, the Army dishonored his memory. Pat Tillman was buried with military honors at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery. He received the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. But for his family, these medals were tainted by the lie that accompanied them. The Arizona Cardinals retired his number 40. Arizona State University retired his number 42. In 2006, a bronze statue was unveiled at what is now called Pat Tillman Freedom Plaza around State Farm Stadium. In 2010, Pat was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. But perhaps the most powerful legacy is the Pat Tillman Foundation. Created by his family, the foundation offers scholarships to military veterans and their spouses, helping them continue their studies and build meaningful lives after service. Since its creation, the foundation has supported hundreds of veterans, keeping alive Pat's commitment to service and education. Every year, thousands of people participate in Pat's run in Tempe, Arizona. The 4.2-mile race finishes at the 42-yard line of Sun Devil Stadium, honoring the number Pat wore in college. It's a reminder that his legacy goes beyond football, beyond war. It's a legacy of service, of questioning, of integrity. Pat Tillman wasn't a perfect soldier. He questioned the war. He debated politics. He read Noam Chomsky and challenged official narratives. But that's exactly what made him so special. Pat wasn't a propaganda poster boy. He was a real man with real doubts, who chose to serve even with those doubts. When you start questioning your government, Pat wrote in his journal, you realize how little they really know. Pat Tillman died over 20 years ago, but his story continues to inspire, not because he was perfect, not because he wasn't afraid, but because, faced with an impossible choice between comfort and purpose, he chose purpose. He chose to serve something greater than himself. Today, when we look at Pat Tillman, we shouldn't see him just as a war hero. We should see him as a man who reminds us that true courage isn't in following blindly, but in questioning, in sacrificing, and in living with integrity until the last moment. Pat Tillman proved that you can be a critical thinker and still serve, that you can question your government and still love your country, that you can have doubts and still have courage. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson Pat Tillman left us, that true heroism isn't in dying without questioning, but in living and dying with your eyes wide open, committed to your values, no matter the cost. Pat Tillman wasn't just a football player who became a soldier. He was a man who refused to accept a life of superficiality when the world asked for something more. And for that, his story will continue inspiring future generations.